Bias, learning to be critical of the media. Freedom fighter or terrorist, passionate or one-eyed, passive resistance or civil uprising, illegal arrival or asylum seeker. The words we use and how we interpret images and statistics give us insight into our perspective or bias, our view of the world. All information is biased as it represents the perspective of the author or editor. So, what is bias? Bias is a prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair or unbalanced. Media bias. It is important to be aware of bias in order to easily recognize it when reading, viewing, or listening to the media. The media is constantly criticized for adding its own spin on a story or representing a story unfairly. There are 8 different types of media bias to watch out for. Bias by omission. For every news story that is selected, there are many others that are left out. Do the news stories you see show a balanced view of real life? News stories will often leave out a perspective that contradicts their story in order to present a more persuasive argument. This is bias because it is omitting facts, therefore is unbalanced. Reporters will also leave out stories that are unfavorable. For example, a news reporter may report on the peacekeeping efforts of the United States in Syria while omitting the fact that the United States has killed many innocent people in Syria with drone attacks. Bias by emphasis. What stories are on the front page or at the top of the hour? Which stories get the largest headlines or the first and longest coverage on TV or radio? Consider how this placement influences people's sense of what is important. Bias by headlines. Some headlines can be deceptive, as their main purpose is to grab attention. Many people read only the headline, which can create a distorted sense of what is really going on, or turn a non-event into a sensational event. Biased language. The use of labels such as terrorist, revolutionary, or freedom fighter can create completely different impressions of the same person or event. Journalists can create negative or positive impressions with words. Notice the use of the word finding versus the word looting. 2 article clips are included. A young man walks through chest-deep flood water after looting a grocery store in New Orleans. He is made to look much more negative than these 2 people who are said to find bread and soda from a local grocery store. The word looting creates a negative impression, and the word finding creates a positive impression. Bias in photos. Unflattering pictures can create bad impressions, and partial pictures of scenes can completely change the context of an event. The media is notorious for wrongfully claiming women are pregnant just because they do not have a flat stomach. As you notice in the picture, apparently, because Jen had maybe, a hamburger, she's finally pregnant. If you know anything about Jennifer Aniston, she is not pregnant. Jennifer Aniston actually spoke out to the media recently on the Ellen DeGeneres show. I would strongly suggest you watch this video clip as it's really informative and powerful. Bias in the source. An article about a cure for cancer written by a drug company is not the same as an article by an independent researcher. It is important to be critical of the source. For example, many people look to the internet to answer their questions. The problem is that anyone can post anything on the internet. It is your job as a consumer to read and evaluate each source and consequently be skeptical of the information provided. As you can see, here's a good example of an online forum where people often get their news and they get their information about what choices they should make as a consumer. Instead of doing their research themselves, they go to perfect strangers that have really no experience or credentials to answer that question. Bias by repetition. The repetition of a particular event or idea can lead people to believe that it is true, very widespread, and much more important than it really is. Sick of hearing about Donald Trump? This is a perfect example of bias by repetition. Bias by numbers and statistics. Statistics need to be interpreted. They are often used to create false impressions. Of the following statements, which statistic would you use to try to convince someone that the death penalty is a good idea? Almost 30% of those surveyed support the death penalty, or more than 70% of those surveyed are against the death penalty. Obviously, you would choose almost 30% of those surveyed support the death penalty because it shows a favorable statistic that can be used to create a positive impression about the death penalty. Bias article decoded. The following slide shows a bias article decoded. If you cannot view it, please take a look using the following link. This is an article about Russian annexation of Crimea. I've identified several types of bias in this article. Read through the types of bias along with the examples and try to think why they are biased. Some parts even have explanations to show why this might be considered bias. This is a really great source that's really going to help you analyze bias in your upcoming assignments.